In the silence of the night, under the endless canopy of stars, a man named Jacob stood staring into the distance. His heart pounded like a drum echoing in a vast canyon. The desert winds whispered around him, carrying with them the weight of 20 long years. 20 years of labor, deception, struggle, and finally, revelation. Jacob's story was not just one of survival. It was the unfolding journey of a man chosen by destiny, walking through uncertainty while holding tightly to the fragile thread of a promise. It began in a household where trickery was familiar, where he, the younger of two brothers, had cunningly secured a blessing meant for another. That same act had driven him far from home, far from the warmth of his mother, far from the land of his ancestors. And now, after so many years, the past was calling him back. But the road back was never easy. In the land of Padan Aram, Jacob had built a life. He had served his uncle Laban, who was also his father-in-law. At first, it was out of necessity. Jacob had nothing, no land, no livestock, no inheritance. Just a promise in his heart and the desire to marry Rachel, the woman he loved. Laban agreed, but only on the condition that Jacob would serve him for 7 years. Jacob agreed, filled with hope. But when those 7 years passed, Laban, driven by greed and selfishness, deceived him. He gave him Leah, the elder daughter, instead. Imagine the shock, the betrayal Jacob must have felt waking up the next morning to realize he had been tricked in the very way he once tricked his own brother. The pain must have cut deep. But Jacob didn't lash out. He didn't seek revenge. He held on to his hope and love for Rachel and agreed to work 7 more years. Can you feel the weight of that decision, the sacrifice, the courage it takes to move forward despite being wronged? 14 years of service for love. 14 years of putting aside his own dreams. Yet, even then, Jacob wasn't free. Laban continued to bind him, to manipulate him, to exploit his labor and success. And still Jacob remained. He worked, he endured, he survived, because something greater was guiding him. But now, something had changed. The atmosphere had shifted. The faces around him were no longer friendly. Laban's sons, full of envy, began to murmur. They saw Jacob's growing wealth, his increasing flocks, and whispered that he had stolen their father's fortune. The man who once welcomed him now eyed him with suspicion. Jealousy had found a home in their hearts, and Jacob could feel its chilling presence. And then, God spoke. The voice that had once echoed in a dream all those years ago now returned, like a beacon in the night. The God of Bethel reminded Jacob of the vow he had made, the place where he had once seen angels ascending and descending on a ladder from heaven. That holy vision, that sacred encounter, came rushing back, and the command was clear: return to the land of your fathers. Return to your kindred, return, and I will be with you. This was not a suggestion. It was a divine calling. But think about the fear that must have gripped Jacob's heart. He wasn't leaving alone. He had wives, children, servants, livestock. He was not just a man on the run. He was now a patriarch of a family, a leader responsible for the lives and futures of many. To obey meant risking everything. To stay meant living under the shadow of manipulation and hostility. Jacob chose to trust. Secretly, he called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flocks grazed. There, away from the listening ears of spies and whispering tongues, he poured out his heart. He reminded them of their father's ways, of how Laban had changed his wages 10 times, how the God of their father Isaac had protected him through it all. Jacob was not just speaking of injustice, he was speaking of deliverance, of divine protection, of a hand that guided him through deception into abundance. And for once, Leah and Rachel agreed. These two women, often at odds, both felt the truth. They saw how their father had treated them, not as daughters but as property to be sold. Their hearts, wounded and wise, aligned with Jacob. Do whatever God has told you, they said. There was no going back now. As the night cloaked the land, Jacob made his move. He gathered his family, his servants, his herds, and quietly fled the land of Laban. There was no celebration, no farewell, just the sound of footsteps moving through the wilderness, hearts pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. But the past never lets go so easily. 3 days later, Laban discovered Jacob's escape, and fury consumed him. He gathered his kinsmen and pursued Jacob for 7 days. The tension in the air was electric. Would there be confrontation, violence? Would Jacob's journey end in a tragic clash of family bloodlines? But God intervened again. The night before Laban reached Jacob, God came to him in a dream. Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Divine authority placed a boundary around Jacob, a shield no man could cross. When Laban caught up with Jacob, the confrontation was intense. There was fire in his eyes, grief in his voice. "Why did you run away?" he demanded. "Why did you take my daughters like captives? Why did you not let me kiss my grandchildren goodbye?" These were not just the words of a father. They were the cries of a man watching his control slip away. Jacob, hurt and defensive, responded with truth. He explained his fear, his reasons, his loyalty, and the way Laban had treated him unfairly for 20 years. Every word dripped with truth, with heartbreak, with the hope of freedom. And then, the matter of the stolen household gods arose. Rachel had taken them, though Jacob did not know. Laban searched every tent, and yet, he found nothing. Rachel, sitting on the camel's saddle, hid them well. Her deception was cunning, perhaps influenced by a life raised in a home where manipulation was normal. Still, it was a moment that taught a painful truth. Even as we seek to obey God, the shadows of the past may still cling to us. In the heat of frustration, Jacob poured out his soul. He reminded Laban of his faithfulness, his toil, the sleepless nights, the lost sheep, the cold, the heat, 20 years of loyalty that had been met with shifting wages and constant tests. But he ended with this: "If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." What a powerful confession, what a declaration of divine justice. In those words was the entire story of Genesis 31, of oppression and redemption, of human deception and divine intervention, of fear turning into courage. A covenant was made that day. Jacob and Laban drew a line, marked it with a stone pillar, and made a vow not to cross it with harmful intent. The moment was holy, painful, yet necessary. The two men, bound by blood yet divided by choices, separated in peace. As the sun rose over the mountains of Gilead, Jacob watched Laban return home. And in that golden light, a new chapter began. Jacob was no longer a servant. He was a free man, walking under the promise of God. His journey wasn't over. There would be more trials, more fears, but something had changed. Jacob had seen the hand of God. He had heard his voice. He had obeyed, and because of that, a destiny greater than himself was now unfolding. What about us? How often do we live in fear, stuck in places where we're being mistreated, manipulated, or simply surviving? Jacob's story reminds us that when God says, "Go," he also provides the way. He fights the battles we don't see. He shields us from harm. He redeems our pain. He doesn't promise ease, but he promises presence. And in his presence, we find everything we need: hope, strength, and the courage to move forward. You might be standing in your own Gilead right now, caught between the comfort of the known and the promise of the unknown. Maybe you've served under someone who never valued you. Maybe your dreams feel stolen. Maybe you're afraid to take the next step. But listen closely. Just like Jacob, you are not alone. God sees you. He knows the hours you've worked, the tears you've cried, the nights you've spent wondering if it's all worth it. And just as he did for Jacob, he is calling you to trust, to rise, to go. The journey may be uncertain, but the one who walks with you is not. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He turns mourning into dancing, trials into triumphs, and wandering into destiny. Jacob's life was never just about escaping Laban. It was about becoming the man God had always intended. And the same is true for you. Let your past teach you, but never let it trap you. Your calling is greater. Your story is still being written. And with God, the ending will always be more beautiful than the beginning. If this story moved you, gave you hope, made you reflect on your own journey, then be part of something bigger. Support us in spreading these shining truths across the world. Click that subscribe button, and be a part of this mission. Let's walk this journey together. Subscribe now to Shining Truths, because your story matters, and the truth will always set you free.